Welcome to our fifth and final presentation topic on the pillars of fitness. I'm Craig Cole, and today I'm going to be presenting to you on the balance component for our pillars of fitness. This is the culmination of our four previous topics of strength, cardio, body composition, and flexibility. We're going to do a brief rehash about what those four other pillars are and how they tie into us helping have better balance. When we think about human balance, we have to recognize that it's actually a physical capability, a physical capacity. So our balance is actually the ability for us to control our center of mass over a base of support. And this occurs whether our body is motionless or in motion. Now our center of mass is something we can think about as our belly button area, the central area of our body. And when we think about our base of support, we need to understand and distinguish that the base of support is a firm point of contact on the ground. And generally speaking, if we are standing upright with good posture, our feet are that point of contact in the ground with our center of mass, our belly button, over top of our feet. So the reality is, due to gravity, the struggle of maintaining our control over upright posture is definitely in relation to the pull of gravity, which we know is a destabilizing force. The ability for us to maintain our daily activities really hinges upon us being able to maintain firm contact with the ground and being able to manipulate our center of mass over our base of support. Our overall mobility is definitely a component that needs to have regular attention to it, as it helps us move independently with safety and control for various activities of daily living. And basically what that means is the more limber, the stronger we are, the better body composition that we have, the better off we're going to be able to maintain our overall balance. We're going to take an opportunity now to look back on some of our prior pillars of fitness. The first one that we're going to be looking at is our pillar of strength. Now we have to understand, when it comes to balance, having decreased strength due to any inactivity or any type of disease, illness, or injury can severely impact our ability to have balance for our dynamic tasks or be able to react to varying stimuli. And those varying stimuli can be such as being bumped, going over varied types of terrain, changing our elevation if you're going up a step or down a step. So maintaining good physical strength is imperative for our body to react and adjust to different positions within space. When we look back to our second pillar of fitness, our pillar of cardio, we need to recognize that our cardiopulmonary conditioning is incredibly important. If we do not maintain good cardiovascular function, we're going to have it where disease states, lack of conditioning, can limit our overall cardiopulmonary function, which impacts our balance because we have it where our blood does not become oxygenated quite enough. And this can lead to issues of excessive fatigue, shortness of breath, dizziness or vertigo, and also decreased cognition can result from this. So it's very important that we work on maintaining good cardiovascular conditioning, whether it's walking outside, walking on a treadmill, using an elliptical, getting on a seated rower, a seated recumbent bike or stepper. Anything that you can do that has rhythmic, repetitive movement to it is essential. Looking back to our third pillar of fitness, the pillar of flexibility, we need to recognize that flexibility has a direct impact on our ability to maintain good balance. Our balance can be impacted when our joints become stiff and our soft tissue starts to become rigid. We need to remember that our soft tissue is our muscles, ligaments, and tendons. When our joints become impacted and our muscles start to become rigid, our mobility becomes impaired. Increased rigidity in our muscle tissue impacts our ability to have a full reactionary response to any type of external stimuli, which potentially inhibits our ability to prevent a fall. Having good mobility throughout a joint also allows our bodies to have better sensation of our body's position and movement within space. Looking back to our fourth pillar of fitness, the pillar of body composition, we had discussed that our overall body composition, the amount of fat as well as lean muscle tissue that we have on our skeletal frames plays a tremendous role in how our body's overall health really is. The quality and quantity of muscle tissue on our skeletal frame provides us the strength and mobility for us to maintain our daily activities. This is important as a component of body composition as it can relate to the overall health of our body. Excessive weight related to body fat can play a pivotal role in our maintaining balance due to faster and uncontrolled upper body sway, which can lead directly to a fall. So if we have extra girth that is on our frame, especially in our upper body, and we have it where we start to become destabilized for whatever reason, we need to recognize that our center of mass, again, the region of our abdominal area, over top of our base of support, again, which is our feet, if we're unable to have it where our body can react quickly due to the excessive amount of mass over top of our base of support, we can quickly lose our balance. Now that we've reviewed the 4 previous pillars of fitness, we're going to start talking a little bit more about balance itself. And the first topic that we're going to be talking about is posture. Posture is the ability to maintain good biomechanical alignment for our skeletal system, and this normally is against gravity. We need to have strong muscles which are important to help maintain our body alignment in relation to our body's orientation to its current environment. And if we're in a standing posture, we need to make sure that our body remains vertical. If we're sitting down in a chair, we need to make sure that our torso remains vertical, especially at the pivot point of our hip. Now there's 2 different types of posture that exist. We have our anticipatory, which is we're consciously aware and we're able to control the decisions that we make and have movements that react according to those decisions. But then we also have reactionary or reactive posture, which is more of an automatic response. And this helps us adapt our gait or our movements as necessary for situations we did not really plan for. Now, as you look at the picture of myself actually demonstrating good posture, we're going to need to look at the different muscles that exist to help us maintain this upright posture. So outlined on the diagram is we have our erector spinae, which runs down the length of our back. We have our rectus abdominis, which is the front of our abdomen. We have our gluteus medius, which is basically the large muscle in the posterior aspect of our hip. We have our iliopsoas, which is a muscle that is located within the hip and helps us flex the thigh at the hip joint. We have our tensor fasciae lati, which is part of the gluteal muscles themselves. It helps us maintain balance of the hip while the body is in motion. Then moving down into the lower leg, we have our gastrocnemius and soleus, which essentially make up our calf muscle. And then we have our tibialis anterior, which makes up the muscle in the front of our shin. And all these muscles work together in unison to help us maintain upright vertical posture. When we think about balance, we also think about the ability for our bodies to essentially remain stable. Now, our physical stability is our body to remain stable, whether it is moving backwards, forwards, or laterally, left to right. It's when our upper body is able to move a few degrees off of the center of our base of support. And remember, our base of support is our feet in contact with the floor. And sometimes we can actually have it where we can supersede that base of support. And this is where the concept of stability limit comes into play. The stability limit is our body moving far enough off its base that it's unable to remain balanced, or we're able to regain our balance. So if we overextend our stability limit, this is when a fall can occur. Now, the fear of falling is something that can actually reduce our overall stability limit, which can lead to that potential fall. Fear of falling is a very powerful emotion that we can have, and this can happen whether we've had a direct fall ourselves or we've seen a friend or loved one have a fall and whatever kind of consequence happened from it. The fear of falling can actually force our body to become more rigid, which will end up shortening up our overall mobility. If this happens and we have an external force that happens to us, or we try to initiate a specific movement, if our body is rigid, it can increase our chance of having a fall. Taking that concept of stability limit and looking at it as an aspect where we have superseded it, we need some type of recovery strategy. So what we're going to be looking at now is what are called balanced recovery strategies, and these are borrowed from a program called Fall Proof. Now there are three different strategies that are control mechanisms identified as ankle, hip, and step strategy. And these help us maintain or restore our balance. They help us control our body sway with either walking or even while we're standing still. Now let's take a look at these three different strategies, starting with our ankle strategy. We need to recognize that our ankle is at a strategic spot on our body as it's connected to our base of support, which our base of support in this event is our foot. Our upper and lower body motions then will move together about the ankle. So if our shoulders and our hip start to move forward, they're going to be having their motion move about the ankle. And vice versa, if the shoulders and hips start to move backwards or side to side, that motion is going to be coming about the ankle joint. It's important for our ankle to have good strength and mobility, but then also sensation, so it gives us feedback to our brain as where our body is within space. Our second strategy is our hip strategy. And this is where the muscles in our hip engage, forcing our center of mass to move over our base support a little quicker. And this is important because any sudden instability results in significant sway for our upper and lower body, which can move in opposite directions. So if we think about that for a moment, if we all of a sudden start losing our balance and our hip has to move forward, our shoulders will immediately move backwards. And then we'll have a sudden change where our hip will push backwards and our shoulders will move forward. This is where our hip strategy comes into play because we're trying to relocate our hip back over our base of support. Now our hip strategy requires us to have good range of motion flexibility about the hip joint. We also need to make sure that we have good strength in our hip and thighs as well. Our third strategy is our step strategy. And this is the ability for us to have our stability limit get exceeded, forcing us to step forward, backward, or side to side as our balance starts to go in one particular direction. The step strategy gives us the opportunity to try to reestablish our balance. Our step strategy is affected by our lower body strength, power, and mobility. And this is why it's very important for us to maintain good overall strength, muscular power as well, but then also good range of motion through our hip and ankle joints. In order to truly appreciate our balance, let's go ahead and talk about some of the body systems that will allow for us to actually maintain balance in the first place. There's actually three primary sensory systems that help the body balance itself. We have our vision, vestibular, and somatosensory. Now you're going to see here on our slide there's various other systems that interact with the sensory systems, and we're going to get to each one of those here in just a moment. But let's talk about those three sensory systems a little bit more in detail. The visual system allows us to adapt to light changes. So we go from light or dark rooms. It also allows us to understand our position within space. The vestibular system allows us to recognize our head movements. Does our head tilt up, down? Does it tilt right, left? Does it actually rotate right or left? It lets us know if our body or the world around us is actually moving. And then our somatosensory system allows us to experience touch, pain, and even vibration. It helps provide feedback for our bodies in relation to our base of support. Now moving from our sensory systems, we're going to translate over to our nervous system, in particular our central nervous system. This system has it where information that's relayed via the sensory systems is sent to the spinal cord and also our brain. And once it's in the brain, the sensory information is moved to the cognitive area of the brain. So the cognitive area helps us interpret external and internal sensations to determine the appropriate response from our muscles. This system allows us to have our attention, memory storage and retrieval, and even allows us to anticipate or adjust our physical and emotional responses to certain types of stimuli. The cognitive system, while it helps us interpret our information, helps us understand what is happening to our body and helps us understand how we should appropriately respond. Moving from the cognitive system over to the motor cortex, we need to understand that the motor cortex is located behind the frontal lobe of the brain, and this area takes information from the cognition area and begins the voluntary initiation order for our muscles to actually perform a certain movement with a certain amount of muscle activation required for that particular stimulus. Once we've gone through the motor cortex and we've processed the information relayed via the sensory systems, we're going to transmit that information back to the nervous system so that it can relay the information via the peripheral nervous system. So once it's back into the spinal cord, it gets sent to the rest of the body from the motor cortex area. This stimulates our muscles into action. So once the muscle action results from the coordinated effort via the nervous system, it's called a muscle response synergy. Now this drives the coordinated response from the various muscle groups from an intended body area to perform a specific movement or action to help us move and then balance. So it's a long chain of events from our bodies going and experiencing a certain type of stimulus to the information getting relayed from the sensory systems to our brain, to different areas of the brain, and then right back to our muscles so they can have a coordinated response. If there was any dysfunction along this chain, our muscles would not be able to respond appropriately, and a fall would then occur. The three sensory systems that we just had talked about, the vision, vestibular, and somatosensory, are actually classified as peripheral systems. And this means that the information that they obtain actually comes from the external environment around us that we interact with. Ideally, we want all of these systems to work together so they help us perceive our environment and our movements so we can maintain balance in various situations. Now, our vestibular system works directly with our visual system. Our visual system actually is considered to be our primary sensory system in relation to the three of them. And both vestibular and visual systems working together help us determine our body's overall position in space above our base of support. And again, if we're standing vertical and we want to have it where our body is a nice straight line, we want to make sure that our shoulders stay above our hip and our hip stays above our feet, which are in contact with the ground. And we need to remember that our base of support is our feet in contact with the ground itself. Now, each one of these systems actually continually has to adjust itself as our body or the environment itself changes or moves. Now, sometimes there are changes that actually occur to our cognitive system, which again helps us interpret information gathered from our sensory systems. When there's changes to the cognitive system, it actually affects how our body processes the sensory information and changes how those responses are actually then applied. These changes can occur because of age, disease, injury that usually occur throughout our lifetime. Now, we also can have some changes to our ability to multitask, and that's from both a physical and cognitive functioning standpoint. The multitasking area can then be affected also because of age, disease, or also different injury states. Ultimately, we need to recognize that if there's any diminishing characteristics to our vision, vestibular, or even somatosensory systems, that our balance overall can be directly impacted, leading to a potential fall. As I mentioned, when we have it where the visual, vestibular, and somatosensory system are all working together and they're all working up to speed, it helps us maintain our vertical posture and our balance within our environment. It's important to know, though, that there are times when there are going to be challenges that occur, and this can occur again due to age, disease, or any type of injury. For the topic of our discussion, we're going to focus a little bit more on age than we are the disease states or injury states. There's too many variables to go into from a disease and injury state, and we could quite honestly spend all week here. But what we're going to do is we're going to focus again a little bit more on age and how that impacts us. So as we age, we can actually have it where our vision starts to change. We can have reductions in our depth perception, our ability to have the ability to adjust to contrast, lightness and darkness. We can also have a reduced field of vision. it affects our body's ability to overall recognize its position with its environment. Our somatosensory system can actually be impaired by age as well, as we can have issues with our proprioceptors. And our proprioceptors are usually found within our connective tissues, such as our skin, our muscles, and also our tendons. All these give feedback to our brain about what our body ultimately is experiencing. Now, this is a very important key aspect, especially for those of you that may have any type of neuropathy. Reduced sensation within the skin. And this is something that is very important, because if you're standing upright and you have neuropathy within your feet, you're not going to have very good sensation in your toes, through the arch of your foot, or down through your heel. And when you have sensory impairment that way, it affects your body's ability to have good relayed information about where your foot position is at. And remember, our feet are our direct base of support within our environment. We can also have where there's changes within our vestibular system, and usually these changes start to occur around age 30. What usually ends up happening is the density of our hair cells start to decrease. Now, the vestibular system is a very important component, because if we have any challenges that occur within our visual system as well as our somatosensory system, due to either one of them giving us misinterpreted info, the two systems start to decline, or ultimately if any of them start to fail, the ears become a key component of us ability to maintain any type of balance. The motor system ultimately is our muscles' ability to function, and they function when they take the information that's gathered from the peripheral sensory systems and ultimately act upon it. The higher command centers in the brain signal to the central nervous system to make the muscles respond basically according to whatever stimulus is actually presented to it, what's actually happening to our body within our environment. And what ends up happening is the muscle's response is stimulated for either an anticipatory or reactive postural control mechanism. And if you remember back earlier in our discussion, the anticipatory is basically our conscious thought about when we are approaching a certain type of environment. We make a decision about how we're going to react preemptively. And then our reactive postural control is when all of a sudden our body has a stimulus that is enacted upon it, and we have to immediately respond and adjust essentially on the fly. Now, our motor system definitely requires us to maintain a certain level of strength through resistance training exercises, as well as having good endurance capabilities through aerobic-based exercises. Ultimately, if we do not take good care of ourselves from a strength standpoint, our muscles are not going to function appropriately and respond when we need them to. The motor system ultimately can have its own challenges too, just like the peripheral systems can. Now, again, aging, that is the key area that we're focusing on. But aging can decrease our reaction times and our responses, as well as our overall movement speeds. So what ends up happening is when a nerve signal is relayed from the sensory systems to the brain, back to the spinal cord, back to the muscle, sometimes as we age, the efficiency of that nerve signal transduction doesn't quite occur as fast as it used to when we were younger. So what ends up happening is our processing of the sensory information starts to decline down. Again, that nerve signal just does not travel as fast as it used to. The motor system's ability to appropriately respond can be impacted, and this is where the muscle response itself starts to become degraded because it requires an increased threshold of a certain type of stimulus. And basically what that means is a muscle will not respond quite as strongly to a stimulus if it does not sense a direct and strong type of stimulus. I hate to say it, it's like, if you have a person, who lightly taps you on the arm versus somebody who punches you in the arm, which response is going to get your attention the quickest, if you will? Aging can also have it where it infuses decreased strength and muscle power within our muscle tissue. And we have a natural phenomenon that starts to occur usually after the age of 50 that's called sarcopenia. And this becomes the natural muscle wasting that occurs just by the natural physiological response of our mitochondrial cells starting to age. And this sarcopenia, this reduced strength and muscle power, diminishes our ability to properly execute any type of balance strategy. And we need to remember that our balance strategies are our ankle, hip, and step strategies. Now, something that also tends to occur, and this can occur due to inactivity, but can also definitely occur due to sarcopenia, is the flexibility, the range of motion in our joints starts to decrease as we age. And when our muscles become less pliable, they lose much of their elastic properties, which a stiff muscle can actually cause mobility issues and ultimately a fall. Now, the reduced flexibility makes us become stiff and limits our overall joint range of motion, which has a couple of different effects. It can affect our walking or gait speed. So every single time that you take a step, when you're taking another stride forward or backward or side to side, whatever it may be, the speed that you can get your opposite foot in contact with the ground can change as we age. We can also have it where the muscles along our spine start to become weak, and that can definitely affect our posture. We can even have it where our muscles can generate pain with certain types of movement. And ultimately what this can do is it restricts our movement patterns and makes our movements a little bit more compact, a little shorter, if you will. And again, that can end up leading to a potential fall. Now, going back to the topic of sarcopenia, like I was mentioning, sarcopenia is a natural phenomenon that occurs for muscles as we age. And the sarcopenia itself impacts our motor units that connect our nerve fibers, or our nerve endings to our muscle fibers, restricting the amount of muscle that can be recruited when a certain stimulus occurs. Now that we have a better appreciation for what balance is, the different systems that constitute our ability to maintain balance, and some of the changes that can occur, especially while we go through the aging process, we need to understand that there is still the ability to train our balance. Now, a lot of times I've had individuals come up to me and say, hey, well, what's the one exercise I can do to restore my balance? And my response back to them is, well, what's your balance challenge in the first place? There's a misnomer about what balance really is when it comes to a lot of individuals, because we always want to have this magic bullet to fix the problem. When it comes to balance training, there's actually a couple of different types. Our center of mass training, and then also our sensory training. Now, each one of these training stimuluses are actually going to be where they help work on improving our visual, somatosensory, and vestibular systems. So starting with our center of mass training, the main objectives of this type of training are to work on establishing better upright posture, and again, that's whether we're seated or in a standing position. We want to work on shifting our center of mass from our base of support, which again, our base of support is our feet in contact with the ground, and then also being able to reestablish our balance once we move. We want to be able to work on increasing our movement speed and reducing our body rigidity. And this is going to have to entail increasing our strength and power within our muscles, then also reducing down the rigidity that goes about our various joints so that they can move freely within space. Now, as we're talking about with aging being an area of, we'll say just challenge, it's not a negative, but it can be a challenge, is that aging can lead to us having a misinterpreted true vertical. So what ends up happening is when we're sitting there in a chair, we could have it where we think that we're sitting up nice and tall, but in the reality is we might be leaning a little bit off to the left-hand side, or we might be leaning backwards just a little bit. With our sensory training, the main objective of this is we want to try to increase the efficiency of healthy or any impaired sensory systems while then also teaching compensation for the sensory systems that might be permanently disabled. Again, as we're talking, if we have one of our three sensory systems that has a misfiring, a misinterpretation, diminished response, or ultimately no response at all, it's going to greatly impact our ability to maintain balance and restore our balance if we have some type of stimulus occur to us. So sensory training ultimately is trying to enhance our healthy sensory systems, try to build or maintain the level of whatever type of impaired sensory systems we still have, or try to work on teaching a compensation effect for any impaired systems that we might have. Now again, aging can naturally impact the effectiveness of our various sensory systems. So it's important, again, with any type of exercise training, be it balance training, strength training, aerobic, or flexibility, practice, practice, practice. You can never practice enough when it comes to these, because you always want to try to work on constantly improving, or at least getting to the point where you can maintain the effectiveness of movement and sensation within your body to help you maintain your balance. Since we're talking about exercise for balance, we need to understand that there's some very key pieces of equipment that we can use to help restore our balance and work on our different sensory systems within our body. Now listed on the slide, we have our Physioball, a stability disc, and a foam pad. With a Physioball, they can come in a variety of colors and sizes, but the sizes are very dependent upon the height of a person. So on this chart over here, I have it where we have the diameter of a ball when it's fully inflated. And that means when you press on the ball itself, there's a certain amount of firmness that goes along with it. Now each size of the ball is listed in centimeters, and that's usually like that on the various packaging that's out there for the Physioballs. But each one of these is corresponding to the height of an individual, and there's different ranges of height that corresponds with the diameter of the ball. So if you're an individual that's anywhere between the height of 5 foot and possibly under, then the size of a ball is going to be about 45 centimeters. If you're 5'1" to 5'8", you're going to be working optimally with a 55 centimeter ball. For the heights of 5'9" to 6'2", you're going to be working with a 65 centimeter ball. For the heights of 6'3" to 6'7", you're going to be working with a 75 meter ball. Now if you're 6'8" and up, you're going to be working with an 85 centimeter ball. Now again, each one of these different diameter balls is very important because we want to try to make sure that the height of your hip stays almost roughly parallel to the floor when you're in a seated position. Now the stability disc is a very neat device because on the top surface it's relatively smooth. It has some bumps on it to help give it some textured surface, but then on the base of it, it usually has little nubs that help it maintain a little bit better contact with whatever surface it may be on, especially carpet. Now the neat thing about the stability disc, it is an inflatable rubber disc. And the neat thing about it being inflatable is when you step on top of it, it actually deforms to your weight. So it's going to work on encouraging you to help keep your foot nice and square and keep equal weight distribution between the forefoot and the hind foot. And foam pads are another neat device where they actually are a larger width, so you can step on them with both feet. But again, you can use them for just a single leg stance, weight shift, heel to toe shifts, what have you. But all three of these pieces of equipment are invaluable for helping us restore our balance. We're going to start talking about our balance exercises by talking about our center of mass exercises. And our first one up here is going to be talking about a seated balance exercise, which is essentially an introductory movement. The equipment that we're going to need for this is a chair with a piece of foam or a stabilization disc, or the actual Physioball itself. So our seated balance exercise engages the trunk and muscles of our upper back. So the main emphasis is to try to work on maintaining muscle activation, which is maintaining or relearning to sit in a vertical posture above our center of mass. The body during this exercise maintains its posture about our center of mass by maintaining 2 points of contact as a base support. The hip on the ball or chair, and the feet in contact with the floor. If you're using a chair, it's recommended to use a stability disc, which is an inflatable rubber disc used for standing balance exercises as well as seated. It's important to keep the eyes fixed in this situation on a stationary eye-level object. And this will help give the brain the sensory feedback that it needs to let it know that the environment is non-moving and that the body is still in space. So in our example here, we want to sit up nice and tall with our feet flat down on the floor. You can relax your hands on your thighs or on the side of the ball depending on your initial comfort level. Act like you're trying to drive the top of your head towards the ceiling and the back of the head to the wall behind you. This helps engage the muscles of the upper back, bringing the cervical neck in better alignment with the spine. Think about your shoulders slightly pushing back and down like you're trying to bring your shoulders into your back pockets. Now you draw your abdominal muscles in like you're trying to flatten them, and this helps keep them under tension. You're going to work on maintaining a controlled breath while you're holding this vertical posture for an allotted amount of time or as best as you possibly can. Generally speaking, we want to try to have it where you're holding this posture for about 15 to 20 seconds, usually for about 2 to 4 repetitions. Now again, when it comes to a seated balance movement, yes, it starts out as an introductory, but then we can work on going through several progressions. We can progress to an intermediate level or work on sitting on the Physioball itself, because this is a little bit more challenging. It's more of a destabilized surface. We can then work on going into a much harder progression where we reduce our field of vision by either wearing dark glasses or ultimately even closing our eyes. But we can also alter the whole entire exercise itself by changing the width of our knees. And this can either open or close the gap between our feet, which is going to alter our overall stabilization for our point of contact or our base of support. Our next center of mass exercise is actually going to be incorporating the seated balance, but this time we're going to be incorporating arm progressions. Again, we're going to be using a chair with a stability disc or foam pad, or a Physioball if you want an increased challenge. But here our main objective is to try to work on our somatosensory and also visual systems. And this ultimately is going to try to teach our trunk to have increased stability, we're going to have better control around our center of mass, we're going to heighten our overall awareness of our body's position in space. We're going to work on overall coordination of movement, and this is coming from the appendages from our arms to our shoulders. We're also going to work on increasing our use of our vision while enhancing our overall range of motion about our joints. And this is good for those that may have tight muscles within our shoulders and arms, or also those that may have some arthritis within the shoulder joint itself. Now, with this type of exercise, we can always again have additional progressions that go along with it. And I'm going to be showing you some of these arm progressions on the next slide. But we can work on moving from unilateral to bilateral arm movements. We can overall increase our range of motion at the shoulder joint. But then we can again also work on performing these movements from an eyes open position to an eyes closed position. Now in our seated balance with arm progression, we're going to be looking at our arm progressions from a unilateral standpoint. We're going to raise and lower each arm forward to shoulder height for our first movement, laterally away from the body up to shoulder height for the second movement, and then directly overhead as high as we feel comfortable for our third movement. Primarily, when we get started with this exercise though, we want to make sure that we get in that vertical sit posture first. We want to make sure that we're maintaining good balance on whatever contact surface that we're sitting on. And that's whether, again, it's a chair with the physio or the foam pad or the stability disc, or sitting on the Physioball itself. We always want to make sure that we maintain good balance first and foremost with good posture. Now, while we're going through the motions of the arm, it's important to keep the lower body as stationary as possible. This is going to force our pelvis and lower body muscles to further help stabilize the upper body so that we can maintain vertical posture about our center of mass. It's important to recognize that any upper torso lean compensations, as we want to try to always focus on keeping the shoulders as level as possible during this balance exercise. As the movements get easier and the balance begins to improve, progressions can stem from bilateral movements of the arms or again reducing our field of vision. By reducing the field of vision, and in particular our example of our eyes being closed on the right hand side of the screen here, we're going to see that it helps create a better mind and body connection. And it helps strengthen the proprioceptive feedback from the muscles and tendons in relation to the brain. We're going to try to aim to hold each of these movements for a count of 3 to 5 before returning to the start position. So again, if we're looking at our frontal raise, we're going to lift that arm out in front to the height of the shoulder, maintain good vertical posture, keeping that arm in that position for about 3 to 5 seconds before slowly lowering it back down to its origination point. And it's important to understand too that in the aspect of safety, we always want to make sure that we have a solid non-rolling chair nearby so you can reach out quickly to grab a hold of it if you feel your balance starting to slip away for whatever reason. And this can help you reestablish your balance because as soon as we put our hand in contact with a firm, stabilized surface, it helps give a sensation to our brain that we're stable as well, which can help us regain. Now, I also want to make sure we reiterate that an essential piece of safety equipment is making sure that you have any types of pillows, cushions, thick blankets on the ground that helps surround you. That way, if you do end up falling off the ball or falling out of the chair, you're hopefully going to land on a soft surface. Some other center of mass exercises are our seated balance with leg progressions. And again, for this one, you're going to need a Physioball. And this one is a little bit more of an upgraded movement than what was with the arm progressions exercise. Again, you want to err on the side of caution and safety, making sure you stay away from any hard, sharp objects. That way, if you happen to roll off the ball, you're going to hit the floor and you're not going to hit your head on any hard objects. But again, I recommend working on having where you've got pillows, thick blankets, anything that can help brace your fall if you do happen to fall. The objective with the seated balance with leg progressions is to help improve your overall hip control and the flexibility of your lower back, hip, and lower leg. We also want to use it to help improve our baseline strength of our quadriceps, our lower abdominal muscles, and also our lower back extensors. Now, this is another exercise where there are certain progressions that can go along with it. We can work on lifting our heels, lifting our toes, going through knee extensions, and then going through knee lifts. So now we're going to take a little bit more in-depth look at our seated balance with leg progressions. We're going to begin by sitting either on a chair with the cushioned foam pad or the stability disc, or in this circumstance for our example exercise using the Physioball. We're going to work on engaging the muscles of our trunk to sit up nice and vertical. And after we've established our balance, we're then going to move on to our leg exercises. But it's very important that you make sure that you have your balance on the sitting surface first before you move on to any of the leg progression movements. Now for our first progression, the heel raise, we're going to focus again maintaining that upright posture with our eyes looking forward at something that is eye level and non-moving. We're going to lift either one heel or both heels off the floor, keeping our toes down depending on our desired level of difficulty. Once we've gone through a few repetitions with our heel raise, we're going to move on to our toe raise. So the toe raise is just the opposite of the heel raise. We're going to keep the heels underneath the knees, lift one set of toes or both of them off the floor, keeping the heels down depending again on the level of difficulty we desire. If you want to try to add a little bit of a challenge, you can do a combination between the heel raise and the toe raise. You can alternate the toe and heel lifts for a given set, driving one set of toes off the ground while elevating the opposite foot heel up. Make sure, if we're going through these heel and toe alternations, that you focus on keeping your upper body as stationary as possible and working on controlling your breath. Now we go on from the toe raise to the knee raise. And the knee raise is going to require a little bit more focus on our vertical posture. It's a good idea to maintain a little bit more stability by using a base when using a Physioball if you have one available. And this is just something that the ball sets in, and it helps keep it if the ball starts moving front to back or laterally side to side from actually rolling out from underneath you. Now I usually recommend trying to brace your core and the stationary leg when you're working, and then work on feeling the body weight actually shift once you engage the movement. And this lets you really focus on the sensation of the opposite foot losing contact with the ground. You're then going to raise your knee to a height that you feel is comfortable for you. And again, the height of your knee raise can be a progression in itself. It's a good idea to work on alternating the knee lifts as you want to try to get the most out of the weight shift that naturally occurs. And again, with this, you're going to work on alternating between your left leg and your right leg while you're going through your knee raises. Finally, with our leg extension progression, we're going to have it where it's the overall setup and body weight shift as in the knee raise. Now the focus this time is going to having the lower leg extend forward, working to bring the leg as parallel to the ground as possible. You're going to work on controlling your trunk through the pelvis and your stationary leg. And this means that you're going to feel the muscles in that stationary leg really tense up as your weight starts to shift. Again, it's a good idea to work on trying to alternate with both legs. Now, if you want to, you can work on just one leg at a time and go through a certain number of repetitions. That's just fine. But if you're working on getting to where you get accustomed to that weight shift, alternating legs is imperative. Now, if you want to try to have an added challenge, try incorporating a knee lift and leg extension into one repetition. And this is for those that have basically good balance when it comes to the knee raise and going through the leg extension. What you're going to do for all of these movements is you're going to try to aim for about 8 to 10 repetitions for usually about 2 to 4 set cycles. When it comes to balance-based exercises though, the skill and comfort level of the individual really is going to vary. When getting started with any type of balance exercise, start with what you ultimately feel is comfortable for you, and that's going to help give you the best quality repetitions, not just quantity repetitions. For the last center of mass exercise that we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about standing balance this time with a varied base of support. Now, I want everybody to make sure you understand, when it comes to center of mass exercises, there are a bunch of different varieties that are out there, and what we've just covered are just a small handful of examples that you can actually work on progressing on. But with our standing balance, we want to make sure that we have specific equipment. We want to make sure that we have a handrail that's nearby, some type of grab bar, you're standing next to a wall, or you're holding on to a sturdy chair that's available. And we want to make sure that we have these basically positions that are available, because if we do start to lose our balance for whatever reason, we can again reach our arm and hand out, make contact with a stable surface, and reestablish our balance, hopefully preventing a fall from occurring. With the standing balance and varied base support, our objectives basically are to try to relearn how to control our center of mass while we're standing vertical. We want to work on continuing to develop core and pelvic strength, which is going to translate down from the abdominal muscles through the hip, down through the thighs, and all the way down to our ankles to that base of support. Again, with any type of exercise, there's always types of progressions that can go along with this. So we can actually alter the surface that we're on. We can go from standing on firm contact with the ground to then standing on foam pads, which decrease our stability a little bit more, to then progressing to standing on the stability disc, which is going to further decrease our stability. Then you can even step on a box of sand, where you're actually standing on sand itself, and those granules of sand shift out from underneath your body weight. We can also change our field of vision. We can decrease it by, again, putting on dark glasses, or we can even close our eyes and then work on trying to stand still. We can then also have it where we work on weight shifts while we're standing. We can rock forward just a little bit, bring our hip a little bit over our base of support, going up onto our toes. We can rock back under our heels. We can rock to the outside of a foot to the inside of a foot. So again, there's a number of different progressions that we can work on with this. For our next slide, we're going to take a look, again, a little bit more of an in-depth look at standing balance with varied base of support. So looking at our standing balance with varied base of support, you're going to notice that there's 4 different progressions that are involved here. We have a vertical stand, a split stance stand, heel to toe, and then single leg stand. For a vertical stand, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to work on driving the top of my head toward the ceiling, the back of my head towards the wall behind me, and then slightly lift my chest up with my shoulders drawn back. I'm also going to draw my abdominal muscles in, creating a bracing effect to help give myself better stabilization about my center of mass. It's important to try to recognize the distribution of weight throughout our feet while we're doing this exercise. You should feel like it's relatively uniform from front to back, meaning you shouldn't feel weight resting on the back of your heels or up onto your toes. We're going to learn to control our upper body shifts about our center of mass, and this exercise reinforces this regardless of the foot placement for our standing balance with the altered base of support. This teaches us to use the different balance strategies as the base of support constantly changes so that our shoulders remain over our hip. So again, as you can see, when we go from a vertical stand with our feet relatively close together to a split stance, which has about 4 to 5 inches of separation between the heel and toe, to then we narrow that gap, bring our heel and our toe together, to then ultimately picking one foot up off the floor and balancing on one leg. Now, each of these balance exercises can have different arm placements as well. You can have one hand resting on the back of a chair, both arms down your side, or you can have the arms across the chest like you see in all these pictures. We're going to try to hold these various positions for about 10 to 15 seconds or for as long as possible. You can work on trying to progress these standing balance exercises in a variety of different ways. You can alter your arm placement as already mentioned. You can change the surface area that you're standing on, making it go from a firm surface, which is a non-compliant, to a compliant where you're standing on a piece of foam or a Versa disc. Or you can ultimately close your eyes to work on that full somatosensory effect. You want to make sure that you do what you feel is comfortable for you and work on progressing accordingly. Now, each one of these varied base support is a progression from easy, which is technically that vertical stand, all the way to the hardest, which is then the single leg stand. But you want to make sure that you try to, for each one of these base support, keep your shoulders above your hip as best as possible. So now we're going to be talking about, for our next 3 exercises, what are considered to be sensory exercises. And that is where we're going to be looking at the 3 different systems, somatosensory, vestibular, and vision, and how we can manipulate the movements to essentially pinpoint these different sensory systems. So for our first one here, we're going to be looking at a Physioball sit with trunk leans. And the equipment that we're going to need, again, is just a Physioball and pillows, cushions, or thick blankets to help us brace ourselves in case we do have a fall. Our objective with this is try to work on increasing our sensory feedback from our muscles, tendons, and joints while we're manipulating our trunk position about our center of mass as well as our field of vision. Now we can actually have some varied progressions with this by putting our arms in different movement situations and again having our eyes closed or using dark glasses to manipulate our field of vision. So for example, take a situation in which an individual is standing or seated on a firm surface and has their field of vision reduced either by sudden light changes, continued low light, reduced depth perception, etc. So this situation is important, especially for adults doing any type of activity that reduces visual capacity. If the person is unstable while they're standing or seated, this means that they're making limited use of their somatosensory system and instead relying more upon their visual system. And we can purposely train to improve the use of the somatosensory system by manipulating our vision, either by obstructing it or by eliminating it by closing the eyes completely. So in our exercise demonstration, you're going to notice that my eyes are closed while I'm manipulating my trunk position about my center of mass. Try to make special note that while my trunk is moving, the lower body works hard to remain stable. This is an exercise in which having a partner nearby is important to help assist with the exercise and offer progressions such as object manipulation, a ball toss, or to give feedback about how much lean is actually occurring. Let's take a look a little bit more at our seated trunk leans. So as you can see here in our slide, I have it where I start off in a vertical sit position. I'm going to have my shoulders drawn back, my chest slightly lifted up, my abdominal muscles braced, and I'm pushing my head up towards the ceiling while I'm keeping the back of my head towards the wall behind me. I have my feet flat down on the ground, work on trying to keep my heels relatively underneath my knees, and I'm sitting square on top of the Physioball. Now, in this slide here, I'm actually doing the hardest variation of the weight shift, and this is with my eyes being closed. As you can see, I go into a forward lean, I'm reclining backwards, and then I'm doing a lateral lean left and right. So I got to make sure that before I do anything with any of these leans and I have my eyes closed, I need to make sure that I have my vertical posture established first before I close my eyes and initiate any movement pattern. And by keeping my eyes closed, I'm really trying to emphasize the use of my somatosensory system. And again, that's the feedback from my muscles, my tendons, my ligaments, and all the areas of the joints within my body about my center of mass. Once I have my body in position and I start going through my different trunk leans, I'm going to work on keeping my hip and lower body as stationary as possible, and then work on engaging my trunk for a specific movement. So I'm going to go through a type of lean or recline, and then when I come back up, I'm going to work on bringing my body back into a vertical sit posture here before I make another movement. And this is very important because you're going to, again, work on trying to draw your body off center of your center of mass, go through a movement, hold for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then draw your body back up into a vertical posture. Work on trying to get that true vertical again. Again, this whole entire trunk lean seated exercise is designed to work on that somatosensory system and help you understand where your body's position is within space by getting feedback from your body itself. Our next sensory exercise that we're going to be looking at is trying to enhance our visual system. And again, with this one, we're going to be working on a Physioball sit with an altered base of support. So with this, I'm going to be utilizing a Physioball, a pillow, foam pad, a stability disc that I'm actually going to be having my feet resting upon. I'm not going to be making contact with the firm ground. And the objective with this is we're going to try to alter the surface of our base support while we're engaging our eyes to adjust to our environment. I'm going to try to hold my eyes on a fixed stationary target for approximately about 15 seconds. Now I can work on progressing this by also then transitioning from a seated position to a standing posture on a compliant surface. And remember, compliant means that the surface itself is going to be unstable. So in order to train the system of vision, we're going to manipulate the contact surface under our base support, which is going to be either our hip, feet, or both, depending on if we're seated or standing. So think about a situation in which you're walking along a sandy beach or stepping onto an escalator. Our eyesight-related challenges associated with aging, such as macular degeneration, are actually going to make it where this challenging the visual system may not be very beneficial, and our focus should be on our other sensory systems instead. But if an individual is devoid of any visual challenges such as this type of sensory training can actually be very helpful. Now, our example exercise, the Physioball sit with altered base support, I'm going to be focusing on using the Physioball and the foam padding underneath my feet. The primary purpose of this is to work on sitting with an upright posture, keeping my eyes fixed on a non-moving target that's at eye level. I'm also going to focus on my breathing and keeping my head up and my spine in a neutral position with my stomach engaged. I'm going to try to hold this upright posture for about 15 to 20 seconds and work on 2 to 4 sets. Now again, by having my feet on an altered base support, it's going to cause a lot of engagement through my lower body, through my pelvis, and all the way up through my trunk to maintain a upright vertical posture. Now this exercise can be progressed by standing on the compliant surface, and again, work on trying to maintain a correct upright posture. Now, when you're using a destabilizing surface, such as a piece of foam that you're resting your feet on, it's a good idea to have a sturdy chair, or quite honestly, standing next to a wall that you can reach out and grab a hold of and stabilize yourself as quickly as possible. For our last sensory exercise, we're going to be looking at how we can hone in on our vestibular system. And this is going to incorporate using a Physioball with a actual small ball itself that you're going to be tossing to yourself. But with this, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be manipulating our hip as well as our feet. So I'm going to be resting my feet on a foam pad or a Versadisc, anything that can help destabilize my base support. So the objective with this is to try to manipulate my somatosensory and visual systems by tossing the ball and tracking its movement with my eyes. This is going to help improve my strength of core as well as my spinal erectors, which are the muscles that run the backside or along my spine. It's also going to help improve my sensory feedback from my lower and upper body, letting my brain know what my body's doing within space. Now, some progressions with this is we'll work on increasing the height or increasing or decreasing the height of the ball depending what your comfort level is. You can also do this movement standing up on a compliant surface as well. So when we're trying to work on training our vestibular system, it does require the manipulation of our visual and somatosensory systems. In order to do this, we're going to create destabilization at the base support below the feet or below the hip if we're seated, and manipulate the field of vision by decreasing it, adding either a secondary task like a ball toss or creating a visual distraction. So here is the Physioball sit with the ball toss. And as you can see in the pictures here, when I start off sitting on the ball, I'm going to work on trying to establish an upright and stable posture on my sitting surface and also at my base support. So again, our base support is going to be destabilized. In this case, I'm actually using a large piece of foam while I'm sitting on the Physioball. Now, if you notice the knees, I'm going to use a highlighter here to note this here real quick. My knees are actually above parallel to the floor. Ideally, the reason why this is happening is because the piece of foam that I'm using is actually a little taller than what I had initially wanted. Unfortunately, when I was making these pictures, I had to kind of go with what I had. But ideally, we want to try to have it where the thigh itself remains parallel to the floor, which is going to help give you a little bit better stability in the first place. In this picture here, I actually am a little bit more destabilized than what I had intended to be. But after I've established my stability, I'm going to lightly toss a ball up and work on increasing the height of the toss until my head starts to move. I'm not just going to be moving my eyes. So I'm going to toss the ball up as high as possible while trying to work on maintaining this upright vertical stability. I'm also going to try to recognize when my stability starts to falter because I know what my limit has essentially been at that point in time. And this is going to be one of those things where as I continue to work on future sessions of this exercise, I'm able to work on increasing the height of that ball toss and increasing my overall challenge. Now, if for whatever reason you start to lose balance completely, put your feet on the firm surface as quickly as possible and stop that ball toss as soon as you can. So we've reached the conclusion of this presentation. I want to kind of go over a couple of quick hit points again. And it's important to understand that balance challenges can be a very broad spectrum type of issue that can affect a person at any time regardless of age. We also want to make sure that we're working on maintaining a healthy weight through proper diet and exercise. We also want to incorporate resistance and flexibility training to keep our bodies strong so our muscles function with better integrity and on demand with less rigidity. Again, we always want to look back to our pillars of fitness to understand how imperative they are to helping us maintain better balance. Regardless of injury, illness, disease, and aging, we can always have where we can work on trying to work on improving our balance. And it's important to make sure that you always let your concerns about your balance be known. Don't ever let them be dismissed. Make sure you follow up with your doctor, physical therapist, or an exercise professional that has training within balance for any type of guidance. It's also important that if you're undergoing any type of balance assessments, either from a clinical standpoint, using devices that are designed to measure your instability, or from any type of field test like something called the Fulton Balance Test, which we did not go over because that went outside the scope of our discussion, But these are all different things that help you understand what your balance is so you can work on knowing what your baseline is for future progressions. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me for this Pillar of Fitness seminar series, and especially our topic today of balance. I hope that you did learn and have a number of different takeaways from this 5-part series, and I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.